On January the 30th, Trump nominated Kevin Walsh as the next chairman of the Federal Reserve. Hasn't Trump always been at odds with power, complaining that the incumbent boss of the Fed isn't cutting rates fast enough? So why did he nominate a candidate who is even more hawkish than Powell? The bond that connects Kevin Walsh and Trump is Kevin Walsh's father-in-law, Trump's friend of over 60 years, president of the World Jewish Congress, and one of the second-generation leaders of the Estée Lauder company, Ronald Lauder. Everything begins with Ronald's mother, Josephine Esther Menzer. Many people mistake Estée Lauder as a French brand, but it is an American brand head to toe, and was founded by American Jewish women. In 1908, Josephine was born in Queens, New York City, to a Jewish immigrant family. From a very young age, she was eager to break free from the due constraints of her identity as a woman and a Jew. Fortunately, her uncle, who was a chemist named John Schwartz, invented skincare formulas, and Josephine used these formulas to start making her own skincare products. At the age of 22, Josephine married her husband, Joseph Lauder. In 1946, she and her husband founded their own company. She took her own middle name, Esther's French variant, Estée, plus her husband's family name, Lauder, and put together as the company brand name. She slowly built a client base through demonstrations in beauty salons and hawking on the streets. In 1948, she successfully persuaded the famous New York City Saks Fifth Avenue department store to lease her a counter, marking Estée Lauder's rise into the halls of high-end retail cosmetics. In 1953, the company launched Youth Dew, which is fragrant bath oil, doubled as affordable skin perfume, shattering the rule that high-end perfumes had to be sprays and were prohibitively expensive. Youth Dew allowed ordinary women to enjoy luxurious fragrances while bathing. It became an instant sensation upon hitting the market, cementing Estée Lauder's high-end positioning. With capital and consumer base secured, the Lauder family began an ambitious expansion plan, which was full of business wisdom and family heritage. In 1964, the brand launched men's fragrances. In 1968, the famous Clinic Laboratories was founded, focusing on fragrance-free, gentle skincare products. And starting from the 1960s, Estée Lauder made a major push into international markets, such as the UK, France, and Japan, opening counters in London's Harrods, as well as Galeries Lafayette in Paris, and other famous department stores across the world. In 1905, the company went IPO on the New York Stock Exchange. After going public, Estée Lauder began an aggressive spree of mergers and acquisitions, acquiring numerous brands with distinctive styles to build a massive brand matrix. In 1982, the founder's son, Leonard Lauder, took over as CEO, leading the company into its 21st century chapter. Ronald Lauder, meanwhile, helped his brother maintain a firm grip on the board of directors and consolidate power, ensuring the continuity of family influence. Ronald was born in 1944 as the second child of the Lauders. He attended the famous Bronx High School of Science in New York City, then studied at Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania, where he met Donald Trump. The two were of a similar age, Ronald being only 2 years older than Donald. Their family backgrounds were also similar. One is the son of a real estate tycoon, and the other the heir of a cosmetics empire. The two also shared common interests, both being active in New York social circles and political fundraising. Ronald once publicly praised Trump as a person of incredible insight and intelligence. At the same time, he has been a long-time political ally of Trump and an important contributor. He donated to Trump's 2016 campaign, and after Trump's re-election in 2025, he continued to provide funding. Multiple sources, including former National Security Advisor John Bolton, has confirmed that the idea Trump first raised in 2018 for the U.S. to buy Greenland initially came from Ronald Lauder. Only that back in the 18, besides Ronald and Donald, there probably wasn't anybody who took this idea seriously. But things changed. Now in 2026, perhaps no one will underestimate the Trump administration's determination to acquire parts of Greenland's sovereignty. From this case, you can see how much sway Ronald Lauder has over Trump and over American politics.
some of what Mr. Trump had to say about Greenland.
Countries have to have ownership, and you defend ownership, you don't defend.
In 1973, Ronald Lauder's second daughter was born and named Jane. Jane Lauder attended elite schools all the way up until she got into Stanford in 1991, studying history. And it was then she met Kevin Walsh, who graduated 3 years before her. The two eventually married in 2002. Before the marriage, Kevin Walsh worked at Morgan Stanley for 7 years, eventually rising to executive director. This experience gave him deep understanding of how the capital markets operate. After leaving Morgan Stanley, he served on the White House National Economic Council in the George W. Bush administration. She was special assistant to the president for economic policy and primary liaison between the White House and financial regulators. In 2006, Kevin Walsh was 35 years old, and he became the youngest governor in history of the Federal Reserve. But in 2011, due to his opposition to quantitative easing policies, Kevin Walsh resigned from the Federal Reserve. In other words, from the very beginning, he opposed ultra-loose financial policies. During his tenure at the Fed, he repeatedly criticized the consequences of prolonged ultra-low interest rates. At the same time, he has firmly advocated that the Fed should maintain a smaller balance sheet by reducing purchases of U.S. Treasuries to minimize market interference. So when Trump nominated Kevin Walsh, many people were taken by great surprise, because the reason Trump tried so hard to fire Jerome Powell was that Powell wouldn't listen to him and was cutting rates too slowly and too cautiously. Yet now he nominates Kevin Walsh, who has long opposed loose policy and low interest rates. Doesn't that seem like shooting himself in the foot? However, Kevin Walsh's stance in two areas have shifted and have made him acceptable. First is on AI. Over the past year or so, Kevin Walsh has stated multiple times that he is leaning toward cutting rates because he believes that AI will boost productivity, and this will support economic growth without triggering high inflation. The second aspect is his change of view on the independence of the Fed. On July 17, 2025, Kevin Walsh took an interview on CNBC's Squawk Pod. Here's what he said that mattered the most.
And I would argue was very necessary at the time.
And so do I.
Yeah.
We had an exit plan in 2010 and 2011 that once I left the Fed, they sort of forgot about. So there needs to be an exit plan to get the Fed out of the fiscal business, to give powers back to Secretary Bessent and to the President and Congress on fiscal policy. But it can't be done in a rushed way. It has to be done deliberately. So I'll just make this up. We need a new Treasury Fed accord like we did in 1951, after another period where we built up our nation's debt and we were stuck with a central bank that was working at cross purposes with the Treasury. That's the state of things now.
Well, let me ask you that.
So if we have a new accord, then the Fed chair and the Treasury Secretary can describe to markets plainly and with deliberation, this is our objective for the size of the Fed's balance sheet. The Treasury can say, this is our issuing calendar. And by the end of, let's say, this administration, we'll be at an equilibrium rate on the balance sheet so that markets will know what is coming. None of this should be rushed.
But that would not, just to follow up on this, that would not...
To summarize, Kevin Walsh believes that the Fed's current state of isolation, with almost zero communication with other government agencies, is pretty unusual. He pointed out that during World War II and the post-war period, there was very close policy coordination between the Fed and the Treasury to tackle the challenge of debt issuing. Therefore, his stance is that the Fed should not treat itself as an independent kingdom, but should instead play a more active role by working closely together with the Treasury to better manage national debt, especially as the U.S. currently faces high inflation and massive fiscal deficits. I don't know how many people have listened to his interview. I see the view counts on YouTube is less than 2,000. I myself have listened to the full entire interview, and I 100% agree with Kevin Walsh's stance. I believe that Fed independence can only be the ideal result, but not a guideline for daily operations. Currently, the total U.S. debt is getting higher and higher, and interest payments already exceeded military spending. Under such circumstances, rigorously pursuing the Fed's independence is obviously harming the national interest. So how will Kevin Walsh's principles and values affect the operation of the Fed in the future? And what will be the subsequent impacts on the U.S. Treasuries and the stock market? We will talk about that in the future.